So while loops are kind of conditional, and you can see here they're defined a kind of in a conditional way. So let's say we have a variable where it equals 10, so var equals 10. And now we're going to see if that variable, that kind of condition is true. So while var is greater than 0. So in this case, it should be, at least in the first iteration. So because it's a loop, we're going to go through this loop um, multiple times. And so long as that conditional is true, the loop will essentially continue, potentially even for forever. Okay, so we tell it to print, and here we're going to tell it to print current variable. So in this case, like that, I'll just say current variable just to make it easier. So it's going to be printing the value of var as we get into this while loop. Now, after the printing, I'm going to tell it to subtract var minus 1. So var will now equal var minus 1. So that is, it should become 9 after this line of code right here. Okay? And then it's going to check another condition. In this case, var equals to 5. So when var equals 5, I'm going to tell it to break. That is, the loop will break. So I'm going to end this while conditional loop when var equals 5. Otherwise, I'm going to tell it to print goodbye. So it should print goodbye essentially, as long as until when after var essentially, or when var breaks. So after this break happens, we will have this kind of print statement. Okay. So in this case, we'll do it outside a loop. Whoops, I messed up the syntax. As always, it's always picky with the syntax, unfortunately. And then print. Okay. Okay. So what happens here is that var starts off as 10, as you noticed here. It says print, so it prints var over here, and then 10 minus 1 is 9. So that means now var will be 9. So it starts by printing 10, the initial value. It goes to now 9. It checks to see if var equals 5. In this case, it's not, so it will not break. So then it will print goodbye. So you can see goodbye being printed. Then it goes back to the while loop. It checks that condition. It will then print var. So this time we go back to printing 9. Now var 9 minus 1 equals 8. So var is 8. So 8 equals 5 is not true. So therefore it will not break. So it prints goodbye again. It goes back to the top of the loop. This time var is 8. So is 8 equals 0 or greater than 0? Yes, it is. So it will print var, which is 8 over here. And then 8 minus 1 is 7, so 7 equals 5. That's not true, so it will not break. So once again, we'll print goodbye. It goes back to the top of the loop. And this time we'll print once again 7, or once again var, which is 7 in this case. 7 minus 1 is 6. So 6 is greater than 5, or it's not equal to 5 in this case, so it will not break. So we'll print goodbye. So we have goodbye once again. And now 6 is greater than 0, so that means it will print 6, so we'll print current variable 6. 6 minus 1 is 5, so this time when it says if var equals 5, that's true. So what will happen is a break. So before we can update printing var, we will essentially break this loop, so we'll not get to goodbye, as you can see. So goodbye actually isn't reached in this last case. So therefore, we now have broken the loop. There is no goodbye this time. Unfortunately. And so we can see that we printed all these values because those values meant that they were, var did not equal 5 essentially. Whereas once we get to 5, the loop breaks. So you can see while loops are essentially conditionals. And when we get to that condition, in this case, we said if var equals 5, then we're going to break that variable. So while loops are essentially a way to set up a conditional. You can set other conditionals within these loops to then break them or do something else with them. And so in this case, we told it to break when var equals 5. Okay, so that's basically a kind of example of a while loop. There are other ways to do while loops, but that's one way to use loops, is essentially use a kind of conditional statement to let it do its operation. All right. Now functions are ways in which we can create now multiple parts of a program, create a kind of a more complex way to create some code. Okay, so let's say a function is basically a kind of thing that does something. Okay, so functions are defined as DEF. They're a very simple generic way. Just like we have generic variables, we have generic functions in Python. They don't have to return specific variable types. So print me is just a name of a function. We can give it any name, just like we can give it with any kind of variable. So you can add input values to functions. So in this case, we're telling it to add str. It's a variable. So we haven't done anything with this function yet. We're going to simply tell it what the function should do once we call it. So let's say print str. So what we're saying is we're creating a function called print me. It has an input variable called str, and in that function it will print. So what we've done is define a function in this way, def, then the name of the function. So def says it's a function. Print me is a name of the function that we give, so any name that we create. And then we give it the input value in this part of the code, which says, in this case, we have an input of str. You don't have to give it an input, but you can if you want. And then this colon tells it that the following information, the information below this function, will be in relation to the function. So in this case, function is print me and taking the input str. So let's say I want to call it now. Okay, so I'm going to say print me and then I say print. So what should happen is I'm calling the function called print me, and I'm giving it a value called print. And so what you see is the results print. Why is that? Because here I've called the function print me. I've given it the str input of print. So you can see str is here, and here you can see str is given as print. And so the function essentially all it does is print str. So it prints print in this case. We can define functions in other ways. For instance, we can give it input variables like we do here. Let's say we do this. Let's see, hopefully this works.